Myself, I'm Joe Kirkpatrick, and I work for a couple of different registrars doing IATF audits. I also work for the UT Center for Industrial Services as a consultant doing training and educating companies throughout Tennessee on IATF and ISO 9000. Outside of auditing and IATF, I'm a soccer referee doing high-level college and USSF refereeing, and I coach my high school mountain bike team here in Johnson City, Tennessee. So that's a little bit about me. And today is the first lunch and learn that I'm going to be presenting through UT. And we're going to go over what IATF auditors are focusing on or being told to focus on by the IAOB or their registrars, and how companies can better prepare for their next audit. So that's what we're going to try to do today. We're going to try to get done here in 30 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up for questions. So if you do have questions, we ask you to put that in the chat. Felicia will be monitoring the chat, and then we can go through those questions at the end of our call. And if we get done a little bit early, we will jump right into those questions, and then we can, after that, we can have just open discussions if we want to do that until our closing time. So with that, we'll get started. The first thing I want to go over is a new communique that just came out that's starting actually next month, and it's related to your remote support locations. Within IATF, there's going to be what's called a USI, a unique site identification code, that IATF auditors are going to be reviewing during their pre-planning and during the audit to make sure that remote support functions are documented appropriately. So what auditees or you guys need to do is make sure your quality manuals and your documentation clearly defines what remote support you do receive and what remote support you may be giving other locations. And it needs to match what's on your IATF certificates. And you got to be able to explain those activities, meaning show and prove that you do get support from whatever maybe headquarters that you get purchasing from or design support from. That interaction has to be there, and we have to be able to show that during an audit. Next thing I wanted to talk about was contingency plans. Contingency plans are what we do to protect the customer, not what we're doing to protect our company, but it's what we're doing to protect the customers. And auditors have now been instructed to focus on power outages. And it's because Ford and GM have had issues with companies that said they have a contingency plan, but in reality, when the power went out at their facility, they shut down Ford and GM. So they want to make sure that we are enforcing the rules, and the rules do say that we need to have a contingency plan in the event of power outages. What we can do is, as IATF members, make sure we do have contingency plans for power. Maybe that includes a backup power source. And a lot of the contingency plans I look at just basically say, yes, we can have a generator on site. But in reality, when the power goes out, everybody's going to be wanting to have a generator. And how are you going to get a generator over everybody else that's asking for one? So the question's always asked, do you have a contract in place with your generator supplier? And if you don't, then you're going to be at the bottom of the list, and you're not going to get a generator, and you're not going to be able to power your equipment or your plant. Do you have an alternate location where you can produce product at? Do you have inventory to cover X amount of days with a power outage? Those are the kind of things you need to think about when you're reviewing contingency plans, and contingency plans related to power outages. The standard says you got to test your contingency plans. It don't say how often you do that, but they should be tested based on risk. The most critical one that's applicable to your industry and your business, you should be testing. And by testing means to walk through the contingency plan. An example might be, we have a contingency plan for a press, and that press may include a contingency plan of keeping 2 days of inventory. Maybe it also includes a list of key spare parts that we're supposed to keep, and the ability to run the parts on a sister press or an identical press that we have in the facility. To document that, you count the number of parts that we have after the press. Do we have 2 days worth? If we do, check, we move on. If we don't, X, we plan for something else. We see what failed and address that. We count the spare parts. We're supposed to have X parts of these. Do we have them on the shelf? And does press 4 have the capacity and the ability to run the parts that are supposed to be ran on press 6? And again, a contingency plan is just a plan just based on risk. And a contingency plan should be real. And a lot of the times I go into companies, the contingency plan ain't worth the piece of paper that it's written on. If the stars were aligned perfectly, those actions couldn't happen because they're never tested. But we should be doing a test on our contingency plan. And a test is not running through the actual problem. You know, if we had a flood, will we say we tested it when we had the flood? Well, no, we're supposed to be proactive in testing it before we have the flood or the power outage or whatever the issue was that stopped production. Another common unique that's come out from IATF is related to copyrighted materials. And this mainly has to deal with Asian companies where there's a lot of counterfeit manuals out there. But we're supposed to have copyrighted copies of the MSA manual, the core tools, and the IATF standard. So don't bring out the draft or the training copy that you received during your auditor class. Just don't do it. You got to have the copy of all the relevant standards that you need to be registered for the certificate that you're registered for. If you're IATF, you need to have both the IATF standard and you need to have the ISO standard as well. So if you don't have those, you're going to have to bite the bullet and buy the copies for however much they are online through AIAG or other places that you can get them. OEM targets. If you're not meeting your customer targets, if you're a Ford, GM, FCA, Stellantis supplier, if you're not meeting their targets and expectations, IATF auditors are now adding time to the audit to cover the plans that you have in place or expected to have in place to address whatever the issue is while you're having a negative trend on your scorecard. So if you are seeing a negative trend on the scorecard, it's very important to be proactive and have plans already in place so you don't go into the red. And the whole standard is based on being proactive. Next one is related to one of the new sanction interpretations that recently came out, and this is sanction interpretation number 22, and it's related to competency. The organization has to have training and awareness that includes information relevant to their working environments and basically symptoms for impending equipment failure and or attempted cyber attacks. So typically this is done in the onboarding process. When you bring on a new employee, we go over, or we should be going over, symptoms of equipment failure within your process. And these symptoms will vary based on your processes, your equipment. It could be noise, it could be vibrations, it could be smell or senses, it could be anything. But from your experiences, you should document what are these symptoms that when they happen, we expect employees to raise their hand or raise the red flag. That's typically should be done during the onboarding process. And then related to cybersecurity or potential attempting cyber attacks, typically the IT department does that. And typically that is training on phishing scams or phishing emails, and should include some kind of a testing or maybe emailing out phishing emails from the IT department to see if our employees are clicking on them or if they've learned their lesson from the training. But that should be done because that is, again, this is changes that's been imposed on the standard because of changes in our environment. And there's lots and lots of phishing emails out there. It happens to me every day. I get emails. I get texts now every day from, it says from my bank, but it's not my bank. And they want me to click on something to get it cleared up. And that's just, that's today's reality. And our employees need to be aware of that. Related to control plans, they made a note for highly automated processes. We can, and it's acceptable to reference documents. We don't need to put all of the controls related to complex systems within our control plan, but we need to make sure we have someone that can pull up these links or these references to show that they're there and they're correct. That's a new change that's been put into the sanction interpretations very recently. Red scorecards. If you get any red scorecards from the OEM, it's expected that you need to have corrective actions in place or a plan in place. And typically that results in a special audit that you got to get from your registrar. And these are the rules for what constitutes a red supplier or a red scorecard for Ford. If you're below a score of 80 and you don't have no override recommendation, you're going to get a red score. 8 weeks of sustained unacceptable performance. So 2 months in a row of an unacceptable performance. GM, they have many criteria, but mainly it's if you have a field action within 6 months or a disruption in 6 months, more than one disruption, 7 or more of a severity score in 6 months, or if you're not certified to IATF, you're a red supplier, or if you have 6 or more SPPSs, which is customer complaints basically, with a BIQS impact. The PCA group, if your overall bid score is less than 80, you're on that list. And FCA came out with one specifically. If your IMQ score is in the yellow, it used to be in the red, but now it's yellow or red, you got to have action plans in place. And again, this is just to be proactive. The emphasis is we want all organizations to be proactive. If you see a negative trend in your scorecards, you got to be proactive. If you have a lower score, be proactive. If you don't understand the score, if you got a bad score and you don't agree with it, what should you do? You probably should question your customer, not just ignore it. That's where a lot of companies that I see get in trouble when they have a negative score and they ignore it. They can talk all day long that, hey, it's wrong, it's wrong, it's wrong. Well, have you contacted your customer and clarified that? And if they haven't, then that's an issue. How often should we be looking at and reviewing customer scorecards? It shouldn't be done once a year at management review because you get scorecards much more frequently than that. You should be doing them, reviewing them every time you get them. And most companies issue scorecards monthly. Not all, but most do. So if you do get a monthly scorecard, it's expected that you take actions monthly if you have a negative trend or a bad scorecard. How do you prepare for your next audits? And these are just some of the comments that I'll put up that I think are the most important things to prepare for your next audit. Your customer specific requirements. You need to make sure you have your latest copies of your CSRs. If you have new customers, you need to make sure you have those CSRs. If you're bringing on a new customer, when is the time that you need to have the CSR in the system? Well, typically that needs to be done before you bring them on, because when you're doing your quoting, there may be quoting requirements in the CSR that you need to be aware of. So whenever you start talking to a customer, that's when they should go on your CSR matrix. And if a customer don't have one, well, you need to make sure they don't have one. And that needs to be documented. Maybe the best way to document is in an email. Email them, hey, do you have a CSR? And if they email you back and say, no, we don't, for most auditors like me, that's okay. But what you don't want happen is you come in and into an audit and you say there's no CSR, but the auditor, we can Google a lot. You can Google almost anything. And if I Google company X supplier quality manual and they have one, and you say they don't, well, then that's potentially an issue. And you need to make sure your matrix is up to date, your CSR matrix, that it's up to date with the current revision levels of the CSRs that are online. Sanction interpretations. SIs are sanction interpretations, and what those are is the standard don't get updated every year or 2 years. The standard was introduced in 2016, and it's still the standard. So instead of making changes to it and putting out a new published IATF standard, they published a sanction interpretation. And what that is changes or clarifications to the standard. And you need to be aware of those. Your internal auditors need to be aware of those. Your process owners need to be aware of those if they're applicable to that process. And I would suggest that you include your sanction interpretations in your CSR matrix, because in your CSR matrix, you should have your customer, your process, and the clauses of the standard, and the CSI, the sanction interpretations applicable to that process. And CS sanction interpretations and FAQs, how are those integrated into your quality management system? When there's a new sanction interpretation that comes out, how does it get rolled into your system? And one way to do that easily is your CSR matrix. If you can integrate that into your CSR matrix, and we have an example of that, that when we're teaching our internal auditor class that we do, and a lot of you guys have implemented that type of CSR matrix into your system. And I think that's the industry best, is what we've based that on. Management reviews. You need to make sure your management reviews are being done. And right now, during the chaos that's going on with COVID and supply chain issues and resource issues, a lot of companies, it's not being done. But a management review has to be done on a regular basis. How often do you do management reviews? The standard says you're supposed to do them at least once a year, and more frequently based on risk. And right now, there's a lot of risk going on in the industry with supply chain and resources and everything else that's going on. So most likely, you should be doing them more often than once a year. And the outputs that we're supposed to have from the management review, there's 3 outputs that we're supposed to have from ISO, and that is any opportunities for improvement, needs for changes in the QMS, and any resource needs. And there's only one output that IATF requires. And this is overlooked by many companies, and I don't understand why. But that is, if you're not meeting our customers' performance targets, meaning their scorecards, we got to have a documented action in place. And again, it's to be proactive. If we're not meeting our customer scorecards, we should be having actions in place. That's not rocket science, but it needs to be documented as an output of our management review. Internal audits. We got to do internal audits. How often are we doing our internal audits? The standard says you got to do them once every 3 years. But most companies are doing them more frequently than that. But how often are you doing them? They should be scheduled based on risk, the processes that's causing us problems internally and causing our customers problems. We should be auditing those processes more frequently. Processes that's not causing problems, we need to do them minimally, meaning once every 3 years. That's what the standard says. Product audits should be done the same way. If we're having issues on products or certain part numbers, that product or part number should be audited more frequently on a product audit. Are we taking actions or corrective actions for findings during internal audits? We not necessarily do formal corrective actions on everything, but everything should be addressed with some kind of an action. Meaning we don't want to come back at our next audit and find the same things that you're finding on your internal audits. Quality objectives. Quality objectives need to be reviewed by top management at least once a year. Quality objectives should be done based on the inputs from our customers and from our interested parties. meaning if a customer has the expectation of 10 parts per million or less, then our quality objective related to parts per million needs to be 10 or less. It can't be 20. Same thing related to on-time delivery. If our customers have an expectation of 100% on-time delivery, our quality objective related to on-time delivery needs to be 100%. And I do see that in a lot of companies where they have their expectation 90% on-time delivery. Well, if their customer requires 100%, why are we going to live with 90%? It don't make sense. We should be including or considering our interested parties and customers' requirements. And each process that's documented in our quality management system, processes being purchasing, sales, engineering, APQP, management, internal audits, all of those processes should have a quality objective related to it. And it's not very hard to make up a quality objective. And quality objectives need to be measurable, quantifiable, meaningful, and they need to be understood by those that are working in the process itself. Quality objectives, they need to be measurable, quantifiable, not we're going to improve. We're going to improve what? It's got to be a number. It's got to be measurable. And the reason for this is when we're doing our IATF reports in the CARA system, for every quality management system process, we got to list the measurable, the KPI, or the quality objective. They're all the same. You can name it whatever you want, but it's the quality objective. And you don't need to have a measure of effectiveness and efficiency for every process. You do need to have a measure of effectiveness and efficiency only for the manufacturing processes, not our QMS processes. And then I want to talk about corrective actions. Corrective actions should be done per customer specific requirements. If the customer says they want you to do corrective actions their way, then you do it their way. Corrective actions from the previous audit is very high risk because the auditor coming in at your next audit has to review those corrective actions. And if there are repeated findings, meaning they find the same issue or a very similar issue, that results in 2 major nonconformances, a major against your whatever the issue was, and a major against your corrective action system for failing. So follow up, audit, follow up, audit, follow up on your corrective actions. I can't emphasize that enough because it happens way too often that we go into audits and we find repeated issues. And that's an indication that the corrective actions were not effective. Corrective actions should include correction, root cause analysis in a 5 why, corrective actions addressing a system or a process, and a verification step to see how well the corrective action was implemented. The verification of effectiveness step is after all the corrective actions are done and needs to include going to where it happened, interviewing people, documenting what you said you did, and making sure it was effective. And it's okay to say it was not effective and raise up the hand. That's the plan, do, check, act cycle. It's okay to do that. Just back up and punt and reopen the corrective action. Don't just ignore it, because an IATF auditor don't ignore it, and it'll be 2 major corrective actions. Correction is stopping the bleeding. Correction is containing the situation. Correction is making right what was wrong. That's all correction is. Correction and corrective action are 2 different things. And I want to clarify what that is because that's important in your JSON files when you're filling out your corrective actions after your audits. But here's an example. One is the issue the control plan did not have all the controls listed on it. Well, the correction would be simply updating that control plan to include all the controls that were missing. Corrective action needs to be addressing the process that that we document control plans in and document all of our controls, which typically is the APQP process, and why the control plans did not have that listed. And a look across, read across should include looking at all the control plans and make sure they were reviewed and corrected. Because at your next surveillance audit, your auditor is going to be sampling other control plans. And if you didn't address the issue on all of your control plans, then you're going to have a repeated issue and a potential 2 major nonconformances. Another example, operator not following SOPs. Correction would be immediately retraining the worker and posting a quality alert. That's correcting the problem. Corrective action should include addressing the process and why the operator was not following his SOP. Maybe it was a failure in the training process. Maybe the procedure wasn't clear, but the one or more process needs to be addressed. Simply retraining is not an acceptable corrective action in any IATF audit or IATF company. Simply that's not acceptable. Other additional tools, all of you guys should be familiar with the IATF Global Oversight.org website. Go to that website. If you're not getting emails from them whenever there's an update on that website, go to that website, put in your email address. You don't get spam, but anytime that site is updated, and it's updated when new CSRs come out, when new sanctioned interpretations come out, when new FAQs come out, it gets updated. And also there's a very good YouTube channel that IAOB has on IATF information and IATF auditing. Just look at YouTube and Google IAOB for IATF 16949, and there's a ton of videos on there that help companies with different types of auditing that you can do. So with that was my presentation. And if anybody has any needs or questions related to IATF, you can always email me or contact me. And some of the services that UT provides in regards to IATF is internal auditor training. We also can supplement internal audits. Come in and do your internal audits. We can help companies with their 8D responses to either customers or IATF findings in your surveillance or recertification audits. We offer core tools training. And any other type of training in any industry, even outside of IATF. I'm one of maybe 15 industry experts. I'm the IATF and ISO guy, but we have guys in regards to 14,001, environmental, safety, employee development, Lean Six Sigma. We cover the gamut. If we don't have anybody within our MEP program at Tennessee, we have connections with all the other state MEPs throughout the United States. Do we have any questions in our chat box, Misty or Felicia?
Let's go ahead and open it up to the floor and see if anybody wants to unmute their mics first. And so if they want to do that, other than that, I've got a couple that I will read off to you if we don't have any takers.
Okay.
And also something just happened to your camera, Joe.
Something happened to my camera. Let's see here. Is that better?
No, it's light. It's all orange. We can't see you at all.
I see.
There you go. All right. Trish has just put one in the thing. It looks like she's going to want me to read that one off. So I'll go ahead and do that. I'll start with that one. Do we need to notify our registrar for Stellantis IMQ yellow status now like we do for red?
No, that is not. But the expectation is when you're in the yellow for Stellantis that you have an action plan.
Okay.
Hey.
Oh, go ahead, James.
Hey, Joe, this is Jimmy at Wegman, and my question is about remote support. So we provide remote support for a recent acquisition in Canada. Their only subscriber is OEM subscriber is Honda, which is, you know, it's not an IATF subscriber. So my question is, you know, we provide purchasing support and some other managerial support and leadership. They're ISO certified, not IATF certified, obviously, but we are IATF certified. So would I be required to declare that Wegman is a remote support to another company in this case?
And that company's a sister facility?
Yeah, we acquired them several years ago, yes.
Yeah, I don't think you have to document that, because there would be no need to audit that other facility because they're not IATF. It's not a bad idea to document it anyway, just in case when they, if and when they did become IATF, that sister facility, you had it documented.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
There was a question regarding the presentation available.
Yes, and everything, this presentation is being recorded and it will be put up on our CIS YouTube channel. So it'll probably be next week or the following week before we get it up there, but we will get it up there for sure. I've got another couple of chat questions, so I'll just keep going for right now. You mentioned cybersecurity. Is this a topic the auditors are asking more about?
Yes, in regards to both awareness. One is awareness. Our employees aware of that, you know, of phishing emails, phishing scams, and not clicking on things that's going to get our systems hacked. And the other that they're focusing on is our equipment out in production. And have we done the necessary things to prevent that equipment from being hacked and taken over or held ransom, whatever the terms are, but that is being looked at by auditors.
Okay, good deal. Thank you. My next question is, how much time should my team spend preparing for an audit?
Are you referring to an IATF audit or your internal audits?
IATF.
Okay, and it really depends on the organization. When I was a quality manager, you know, at first I would spend weekend after weekend after weekend myself in the facility getting things straightened out. But over time, I realized that I was spending an exorbitant amount of effort in doing that. In reality, the system should be flowing on its own. So in reality, if the system's running well and we have our processes in place and everybody's trained, there shouldn't be any need to prepare for audits. But the most important things that I would say to prepare for are going through corrective actions, especially the IATF audit corrective actions and customer corrective actions. If you have resource needs within your organization, meaning maybe we don't have a purchasing manager right now, he left the company and we're looking for one. Well, that's an area that we might want to focus on to make sure who's filling that gap. Maybe we do a special audit on that process to bring that person up to speed, because those are weaknesses. And as an auditor, I focus my audit on the pains and the weaknesses that the organization is seeing and that the customers are seeing. And that's what, if you want to spend extra time before an audit, think about the pains, think about the issues that your customers are seeing. So if your customers are having late deliveries and it's because of a supplier issue, well, you need to focus on that supplier issue, because that's what I'm going to focus on as an auditor.
Thank you. We actually have a question from Brett. She asks, why does Toyota not require IATF?
Toyota's like all the Japanese. They don't. None of the Japanese that I don't think none of the Japanese require IATF, and Toyota don't, because they actually have very good systems. The Toyota SWAM manual is very detailed. They've just never bought into IATF. It was started in the United States with the big three, and they just have never joined, just like Honda, just like Subaru. They've never joined. There's more and more companies that are joining, and I don't know the benefits and the cost associated with joining as a member, but they have not. But if you're IATF and you have Toyota as a customer, you have to meet all their requirements, just like if they were Ford or GM.
Okay, thanks. And then it's, what if there is a customer PPM that is not obtainable, like 10 PPM?
Yeah, if a customer has a unrealistic target, an organization should consider, well, should we even be supplying this customer? Because that's a risk. If you don't have the ability to meet their requirements, one, that's a risk. Do you want to be in that business? But if they have a requirement of 10 ppm and we're never there, and some organizations you're not going to be there, you should always be trying to attain that and try to be getting there, trying to be improving, have plans in place to get there. Otherwise it's like we're ignoring it, and we can't ignore our customers' requirements and expectations. So if we did have if I'm auditing you and we're not meeting the customer's target of 10 ppm, the expectation is, well, what's the plan to get there? We need to have a plan to get there that's documented.
Thank you. I don't see any additional questions. Is there anybody else out there who wants to speak up or put another question in the chat? We'll give them a couple seconds. It was a very good presentation, Joe. We appreciate your time. Full of great information. And I am not seeing any movement from the gallery. We did get a thumbs up from James though, so thank you. Do you want to go ahead and close out, and we will go ahead and end it. Oh, we've got some thank yous coming in. So great presentation. Thank you so much for your time today.
Yep, and we will try to do more of these lunch and learns going forward. I know UT has Alicia, you or Misty want to speak on the lunch and learns and how often those are done and plans for the future.
Okay, Joe, you have another question I think is more important. How lenient are spare parts audited in dollar signs?
Yeah, and spare parts is something that just needs to be considered. And there's always the question of, well, if the spare part costs $10,000, do we want to have one on the shelf? And the answer is, well, it depends. And it depends on how quickly you can get that spare part, if it's a next day shipment, or if this is something that takes 6 months to get. Like in my company, we made steel balls, and we had what we were called retorts. And a retort is what the balls went through in the furnace, and a retort costs anywhere from $10,000 to $30,000. But if the retort went out, there's no place in the world, no company in the world that has a retorts just sitting around. So we had to have spares, and that's something we just had to build into our system and our inventory and our budget, because we had to have it, because it was a 6-month lead time to get one. So it really depends on your spare parts. But spare parts are important to have for your key equipment, because if your key equipment goes down, we're screwed. So we got to have those spare parts at least available quickly or on site.
All righty. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, everyone else that was able to join us today. In terms of the webinar series that we're doing, we are actually trying to do 1 or 2 a month. Every month, we're just picking topics that we hear from customers that they want more information about. And we're putting together just a quick 30, 45-minute presentation with some Q&A. This is really just meant to give you all information about the topic from our subject matter experts in the field. And as you can see with Joe, Joe's been been doing IATF and been in the automotive industry for a long time. So he's definitely a subject matter expert. So we try to get that level of expertise on each webinar. If you're interested in what we have coming up for the rest of the year, and also through for next year, you can follow us on our Eventbrite page, which is how you got to us for this webinar today. And then you'll get notifications of new things that we have coming up. We will also have this, I'll follow up with an email when I get the final edited branded version of the webinar recording, and I'll send that to you all in a couple of weeks. But other than that, I think we are, Joe, I appreciate your time today. And if no one has any further questions, we'll give you the rest of the day off. There you go. Everybody just take the rest of the day off. No, I'm kidding.
Well, thanks everyone. And again, if anybody needs anything else from me, you got my email or my phone there. And thank you for your time today. And hopefully this was beneficial to some of you guys.